failed at many businesses and succeeded at a few, which is good. I'm very happy about that. And now I'm just basically the founder of Kane Games, which is doing very well. I'm also the co-founder and spokesperson of the Pan African Gaming Group, and blah blah blah. So I guess I say this to tell you where I come from and from what perspective I look at what's going on in AI. The first job I ever had, this was 7 years ago, was actually as a machine learning programmer at a company called Equalizer, and a chance to work with a lot of like very low level machine learning algorithms, NLP pipelines. And I did have some basic understanding of generally how AI worked, right? And there's a doctor who was one of the co-creators of Equalizer, Dr. Ben Gertzel, who we used to have a lot of discussions about generally like AI. He coined the term AGI, artificial general intelligence. He's written a book about it called AGI. And we used to discuss like what's possible with AI, what's not possible. And I remember those conversations, and today thinking about them, it's so surprising and weirdly, I guess, exhilarating to think that most of the things that we used to discuss back then are now completely possible with AI, like including art, creating music, creating like all of those creative aspects of AI that were supposed to take forever for AI to actually be able to do. And it's quite interesting. We live in a very interesting time. And a few weeks ago, Amadou and I were actually chatting about this, and we were talking about how this affects Africa and the talent pool, and how can we actually use this? What does this mean for us, right? And that's when we decided to talk about this and to do this webinar. And that's why we called it, there's a reason why we called AI the silent equalizer, which I hope we'll be able to fully, I guess, express throughout this webinar. And that's how this webinar came to be. So I'm really excited to talk to you about AI and ChatGPT and generally how I have come to use it and how I've found it very useful in both my personal and business life today. So before that, and again, I want to remind everyone, if you have any comments, anything you want to say, just put it in the comments section. So I'll be going back and forth between the messages section and my presentation. All right. So ChatGPT, what is it? And again, I'm not a super expert on AI models, but from generally what we've been able to look at, that's available online. We know ChatGPT stands for Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer. I'm sure there's a lot of machine learning experts in here who know and can define what a pre-trained transformer is. I'm not one of them. We just know that it was an open source project that was built by Google. And it's this language model that takes in a lot of text data and tries to predict a sequence of texts, right? And let me try to show this by an example. So you take a lot of data, text data, let's take Wikipedia, for example, and you feed this AI model all of that text data, and you give it a sentence and you ask it to complete that sentence based on probability of what's the next word that's probably going to fit in, right? So if you train the data, for example, and you ask it, okay, thou shalt, and ask it, okay, what's probably the next word that's going to come? And there will be a lot of words that would be, that could fit into this next sequence, but it would say the word not is the most probable thing that would come after thou shalt. So it's thou shalt not. And the reason it says that is because it's read a lot of text over the web, and every time thou shalt comes, the next word that precedes is not. It says thou shalt not. So The reason I put this here is to kind of like clear up a misunderstanding that ChatGPT is an all-knowing AI. It's really not, right? It doesn't really know things. It doesn't know what thou shalt not is. It's just read a lot of text over the internet, and it can predict that if one person says thou shalt, the next probable thing to say is not. Right? It just knows what to say next. And this is a very important thing to keep in mind, because I've seen a lot of conversations go way off topic about what ChatGPT can and can't do. And remembering this, remembering what ChatGPT is and how it works, kind of puts everything in perspective. Again, there's so much detail that we haven't actually mentioned here. But remembering that ChatGPT is just a language model, a predictive language model that just knows what's the most likely sequence of words given a certain prompt is, the best description that we can actually put. Right, now that is out of the way, let's talk about the fun stuff that you can actually do with ChatGPT. So prior to ChatGPT, one of the things that I do generally as a startup CEO is I pitch. I pitch to investors. I pitch to a lot of investors. So far, I've, I think, pitched to more than like 200-300 investors, like over the past few years. And one thing that I notice is I really never had a good VC partner to practice my pitch with, right? Someone who's a potential investor. And then don't get me wrong, we have a lot of mentors, we have a lot of colleagues who help you pitch and who help you practice, but it's very hard to get an actual investor, like someone who's potentially capable of giving you money, to sit down with you and practice your pitch with you. Because they're not practicing, you're just pitching and they're going to be like, okay, I want to give this person money or not, right? The first mind-blowing use I found for ChatGPT was using it as an interviewing practice, right? A practice partner. And of course, this can work in any types of interviews. It can work with job interviews that you may have. It can work with any type of interviews that you may actually have, where you can use ChatGPT as a partner to practice with. And of course, it doesn't just work easily. There are certain prompts that you have to give ChatGPT to make it act like an interviewer. But this is just one example that I was able to pull up. In this example, the user is asking ChatGPT to act as an interviewer, because this user has an interview tomorrow and wants to practice some questions. And this user specifically is trying to get a job as a marketing manager, and ChatGPT is going to act like an interviewer and ask him or her questions, right? And you'll have probably access to this slide after this presentation, so you'll be able to go through it. But it's very interesting what you can actually learn from this practice. Like, it asks you actual questions that managers might ask, and it can kind of tailor the interview process based on what you're actually saying. This is very different from looking at potential interview questions for a marketing management job on the web. Like, you can go to the web and you can actually script through a lot of interview questions and you can try to practice for them, which is great. But this is different. This is ChatGPT using all the text information that it's actually learned on to ask you questions live, right? And it can tailor those questions based on what you're actually telling it. So it can become more challenging. It can actually ask you to describe what you just said and stuff like that, which makes it a really good practice partner. And I actually used this to practice my pitch for investors. So what I actually did is I went through an interview session and asking GPT to act like an investor. I went through that interview and I was like happy with my answers. And ChatGPT was like, okay, this is good. I know what I already know, what I need to make a decision. And I was like, okay, so would you invest? And ChatGPT is like, well, I'm a language model. I can't make that decision. I can't say I'll invest or not, because it gets that sassy sometimes, ChatGPT. But then I said, okay, make the interview more challenging. And ChatGPT was like, sure, I can make it more challenging. I can be more difficult. I can be more argumentative. And then it became more challenging. And I realized a lot of gaps on the answers that I was actually giving, to a point where at some point I was just like unable to answer some of those questions. And that was a really good practice for me. And then what I did is I opened another tab and I asked ChatGPT to pretend to be the interviewee, or the person who's actually pitching. And I started feeding it the questions that the other tab of ChatGPT was actually asking. And from that, I came up with a really good investor um, pitching questions list, and what possible answers are actually very good to be able to respond. So this was amazing. It helped me definitely become a better pitcher. And I'm sure many of you can use this for your startups and even for other types of interviews that you might want to conduct. The next time you have an interview, definitely make use of this if you can. All right, what's another use case? So this second use, Code Companion, an AI pair program or an AI programming partner. This is crazy. One of the things that I did after having access to the OpenAI APIs is I wanted to create an emailing bot that kind of uses ChatGPT to respond to my emails. And so I've never actually used the IMAP protocol before. I've I created a new project and I started, a new Node.js project, and I was like, okay, how do I do this? And then I just went to ChatGPT and I was like, hey, I want to create this type of an email bot that does this and that using, whatever. And it took me way less time to build the entire thing than it would have actually taken me without ChatGPT. So without ChatGPT, what I normally do is I go to Stack Overflow. I try to figure out, okay, what do I use? How do I use it? Where do I use it? And then you go to documentations. You try to read how the protocol works, and then you try to work with what you have. Right? The figuring out part takes a lot of time. And just figuring out bugs, figuring out how protocol works and stuff like that takes a lot of time. Now, with ChatGPT, I was able to actually go ahead and do this much more efficiently because I could literally copy and paste my code. I could put it into the ChatGPT, into the prompt. I can actually ask it what's wrong with this specific code, right? Why is it not working? I can copy and paste the error messages that I'm getting and asking it, why is this not working? And because it understands context, right? Like it can actually go back and refer to what I was typing before, it started suggesting really good solutions. You're probably getting this error because you did this and you did that. And it was mostly correct, which is very good. Now, sometimes it kind of leads you astray and you have to go out of that, being entirely dependent on ChatGPT mode and going back to Stack Overflow and trying to figure things out. But it helped me get things done much faster. I built that emailing bot in literally 2 days. Generally, it would have taken me at least a few weeks to be able to do that, especially because it's something that I've never done before. And this is something that's so exciting because now you have everyone, almost everyone, not everyone, because not a lot of people have access to ChatGPT, but increasingly so, many people have access to an AI programming partner. And this is huge because initially, there's this saying called knowledge is power, right? And knowledge used to be power because if you knew something, well, in the past, especially before the days of the internet, it gave you a lot of power. It means you were able to use that knowledge to achieve things. And then the internet came, and then suddenly most of human knowledge was publicly available on the internet. And that changed a lot of things. Then at that point, experience became the thing that was sought after a lot. Like, so yes, you may know things, but you don't know how to use that knowledge because you don't have the experience. Now we're in an age where AI is able to tell you exactly how to use that knowledge, which is crazy. This is exactly why, for example, if you go in and ask ChatGPT, how can I create something like a bomb or an explosive using homemade materials, it will actually not tell you, because OpenAI has created a lot of walls around such types of questions. Now, it makes you ask, why care so much about preventing people from asking these types of questions? And the reason is, it can actually genuinely help you create those things. You don't need a lot of experience to be able to do those anymore. You have an AI model that technically going to fill the gap of experience you have, has all the knowledge of the internet, and can give you like step-by-step instructions to constructing amazing things, right? And this is crazy. This is probably the first time that this has been possible since the invention of the internet. And this has its own implications, of course, very bad implications, and as well as good implications for us, for at least developers, and specifically in this context, developers in Africa. It's actually great. I believe it's actually great. One of my friends was actually, we were talking about the recent layoffs, for example, in big tech in the US. And she was saying that she was actually scared that all of those layoffs are happening, because if they're laying off those types of experienced people in Google, now there's just no way that I'll actually get a job there. And I was actually saying that the opposite is true. The reason that they're laying off all of those people maybe is probably because they've realized that instead of paying those experienced people like $500,000 or $800,000 a year, they realized that an African or Indian or South American developer was not much experience, can probably do the same job now that they have AI in their toolkit. So it may actually be a good opportunity for everyone. And this is true for startups as well. Instead of, if you want to build something extremely complex, suddenly, I mean, like even like 2 or 3 years ago, you needed to raise like millions of dollars to be able to hire the best and most experienced engineers or people in the world and get them to help you build whatever product that you want to build. And this has kind of been an issue in Africa, because fundraising has always been an issue in Africa, right? We've not been able to fundraise as much as we've liked. And that kind of has its own implications. But now, maybe we don't need to raise as much money. Maybe we can actually achieve the same thing that we want to achieve with much less money, right? So it kind of has this equalizing effect. And this is why we wanted to call the session the silent equalizer. So if you're a startup, you suddenly now have, with the same resources that you've had for a few years now, you suddenly have an AI toolkit that allows you to do extremely complex things that you may not have been able to do in the past years. This is the same with artwork, right? Like the most experienced concept artists in Ubisoft typically would have been able to create much better art than most people in the world. But now, because of AI, it's kind of been equalized a bit. Like that experience lack or gap that you may have had is suddenly now much less significant than it used to be. So yeah, this is really why we wanted to call it the silent equalizer, and it's interesting to say the least. This is an example of how ChatGPT was actually helping a user generate really good code, debug code, and help them just go through, what's wrong with the code that they've written and why they're getting some errors, and just generally helping them or guiding them through towards, a working product. So yeah, these first two cases are the most interesting to me. Now, the third use case is as a copywriter. This is not new, right? Like creating ads or creating text, creating emails using ChatGPT is not new. So before GPT-3, there were a lot of AI tools like Jasper AI, Writer.me, that used GPT-2, I believe, to compose emails, compose notes, ads, and stuff like that. And so I've definitely been using Jasper AI for a while, at least for a year now. The first time I actually used it, I was very impressed with how well it can actually create ads. So I can actually give you one good example. We were launching an ad for one of our games, Kukulu. Kukulu is a game that revolves around a chicken that escapes captivity and runs for its life, and it's fun. It's engaging. We're trying to create an ad campaign for it, and we wanted to come up with a headline, right? We needed a very short headline, and we were working with Ethio Telecom that was generous enough to give us a bulk SMS campaign, but the bulk SMS campaign needed to be short. So we need to come up with something very short that can captivate, people's attention, and we were trying to come up with it. So we came up with a few examples ourselves, and then I went to Jasper AI and I said, okay, can you come up with well, you don't actually ask it like ChatGPT, which is crazy. On Jasper AI, you describe what it is that you're trying to advertise, and I described what Kukulu is, a chicken running game. You are the chicken, and you've escaped. You're trying to run away from your life. You're doing this, that, and then so on. And you can restrict the number of words that it uses to to create the headline. So we restricted it into a very short words, and then it came up with the following headline. It said, have you ever wanted to be a chicken? Which was really funny for us. We found it to be fun. It was catchy. We translated it into Amharic, Doro Mohon Kaldiga, and we used that to run the ad campaign, and it worked. It was really catchy. It was really fun. It was very intriguing to people, and we were able to do that. And this was way before we even had access to, before ChatGPT even came out. This was like at least 6 months back. And since then, we've always been able to actually use ChatGPT to be able to create content that's intriguing, compelling, tells the story very well. This is something that we use in literally every content outreach that we actually do. We use AI to complement our creativity and trying to actually create content. You can do this in any of your products that you're actually doing. This is an example of how ChatGPT is being used to create an ad for a water bottle company, and it's coming up with catchphrases for it, right? Or headlines, and it's a very good creative partner. Some of the examples that I created is, hey, sustainably stay hydrated with our reusable water bottle. Stay cool and green with our durable water bottle. Or drink to your health and the planet's with our reusable water bottle. And if you've experimented with ChatGPT, you will actually see how extremely creative it can actually be, some of these inputs. And you can ask it to be funny, you can ask it to be serious, you can ask it to be humble, you can ask it to be more assertive, and you can use it to write content in a way that matches your style, which is amazing. This goes again, I guess, hand in hand with the whole brainstorming process, right? Like when you're brainstorming ideas, and this may not just be for ads. It might be for new features to put into your products. It may be to brainstorm how to actually market, how to actually go about, what channels to use, or what types of sales techniques should we use, like brainstorming new ideas generally. Because it has such a massive corpus of data that it's actually been trained on, it's an amazing source of ideas generally, ideas that have worked before, ideas that someone has used before to achieve things. And this has definitely been one of the best things to do in our brainstorming sessions. Typically, when I'm trying to think of a new idea or a new feature or a new product, even a new game for a company, I usually just go to ChatGPT and I say, okay, can you come up with a new, product or game that's like this, that's like that, and stuff like that. And I just like to look at the outputs, and it's a really good idea bouncing board that you can actually use. All right. The fifth use case is an advisor, especially an AI subject matter expert. Now, this is definitely one of the best cases to use ChatGPT for, especially because there's a lot of knowledge about specific subjects. It could be physics, it could be business, it could be agriculture, you name it. There's a lot of content out there on the internet that is very difficult, for example, for me to parse through and look at it from an expert's perspective and apply it to my business, for example, right? Imagine, for example, I'm a business owner who wants to get into agriculture or wants to get into something that I'm not very familiar with. And typically what you would do is you would go out and you would get an actual advisor. You would, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that now. You should always definitely go ahead and try to get as many advisors as you can. But imagine you don't have the money, you don't have a compelling business or startup for which you can actually sell stock options for and stuff like that. And it's just you, right? And typically, like before this language models were available, there's really not much you can do except for try to research it yourself, try to go ahead and ask a friend, how can I, do this and do that and stuff like that. Now you have ChatGPT, and ChatGPT presumably has trained over all of this subject expertise that are available on the public internet up until 2021. So anything that's actually like, for example, something that we can actually use as look at the actual example that I used here. This business person is trying to actually launch an agricultural like related business, and he asks ChatGPT, I'm thinking of starting an aquaponics farm. I want to grow fish and vegetables in a closed system using sustainable methods, right? And if you think of something like this, you would definitely need someone who understands these types of environments and then the whole domain to give you an advice. And ChatGPT was able to respond as follows. That's a great idea. Here are some specific tips for starting an aquaponics farm. Choose the right species of fish for your farm based on the type of water, temperature, and pH levels you can provide. Consider the local climate and make sure your farm has the necessary insulation and heating and cooling systems to maintain optimal temperatures, blah, blah, blah. Invest in a reliable water pump and filtration system. Make sure you have a proper waste management and nutrient recycling systems in place. Consider the market demand for both fish and vegetables and so on and so on. So this is really good advice. But the whole point of this advice is not that you can't basically find a list of things to do on the web, right? That's not the point. The point is here, you can continue the conversation. You can ask, okay, my water temperature is like this, the environment that I'm trying to do is this, and like based on this, what do you recommend? And it can actually continue to narrow down the advice and make it very specific to the use case that you actually have, which is amazing. This is more of a personal use case. This is something that I find to be very fascinating. So I said, I love learning languages. One of the biggest problems that I've had with languages is it's very difficult to find a person to practice with, right? So it took me a very long time to learn my first language, to learn French. And because I usually try to learn on online internet resources and stuff like that, it's very difficult to train properly. And then I started doing this. So when I was learning one of those languages, I was trying to learn German. I'm still such a beginner. But when I was trying to learn German, I ran into a message on Telegram from a person who was trying to introduce me into a new type of investment opportunity somewhere. I assumed it was a scammer, right? Because you get a lot of those scamming messages on Telegram. And then I responded to that message saying, I don't understand English. Ich verstehe kein English. And the person started to respond in German. And then the person continued to actually really write long sentences in German. And I try to understand it. I try to respond as best as I can. And then the person just keeps responding in German. I'm assuming the person or the scammer is Google translating what I'm saying and then Google translating their response and sending it to me, which is fun. But the thing is, I had to go that far. Like I had to actually just sit down and talk to a scammer about a business opportunity in Dubai for such a long time because I couldn't find a practice partner, right? Like, so you can imagine how hard it is if you're the kind of person like me who does not like going to schools to learn things, how hard it is for you to learn a language. ChatGPT changed all of that, especially with languages like that are very well documented on the web, on the public web, like French, German, even Chinese, Arabic, and stuff like that. It's not very good in trying to learn languages like Amharic, languages that are kind of, not very available. Um, but yeah, it's a really great chatting partner. If you want to learn languages, go into ChatGPT and just start a conversation. And it will be able to not only actually just talk with you, it will correct you. You can see in this example, it actually corrects the user. And then whenever you don't understand something, you can ask, what did you mean by that? And it translates it in English. It's the perfect language practicing partner. I'm gonna try to rush through a lot of the next, like the few remaining use cases, and then I hope we can definitely chat about this a lot. So a researcher, like especially now with Bing Chat, this is something that you can actually do. Bing Chat is a rather infamous version of ChatGPT, which you can actually use to scour the internet and kind of use ChatGPT's language model to give you a more concise and precise, search result. So you can actually go and ask, get me like articles that talk about this, that talk about that.
Hey everyone, I think Dalit is experiencing some technical difficulties, so please be on standby. He'll be right back. Yes, hi, Carlo, I see you raised your hand.
sorry about that. All right. Okay. All right. Oh, this is where I cut off. Interesting. Let's see. Sections. All right. Okay. Oh man, internet is definitely acting up. All right. So you can use it as a researcher. I'm just going to rush through this next slides very quickly so that we can actually get to the question and answer part. But yeah, you can use it as a researcher. You can definitely use the new Bing chat as a researcher. I'm not sure if you heard me explain about it a bit, but you can definitely go ahead and research it. You can check it out. You can try to use it to scour the internet, get good articles on a specific subject, and generally what you would have done as a researcher, but instead using an AI to do it for you. It's a selling partner, someone who can actually help you close deals specifically with your specific business case, the specific client that you were working on, and stuff like that. As a tour guide, it can actually help you. You can actually go ahead and ask ChatGPT, I have this type of a budget. I'm visiting Dubai or Mombasa, and I want to go to this places. Or you can just ask, I have this type of a budget, and I want to have fun. I want to have this types of events. What should I do? And it can definitely help you go ahead and just act like a tour guide and give you specific directions. Like at lunchtime, go to this place, go back to the hotel, eat lunch, then go to this place, and then have a good whatever around those places, because it kind of understands what you want. And if you look at all the use cases that we've talked about, it's not just about going out and looking at the internet and finding some information from the web. It's more about continuing that conversation and saying, okay, based on this information, what should I do based on my specific situation? Which is amazing. It's something that you haven't been able to do so far. To date, you go ahead, you Google something, and based on that information, you try to adapt that into your specific condition. This time you have an AI that you can actually tell your specific situation about, and then it can actually help you figure out exactly what to do based on all the information it has, which is amazing. And last but not least use case is legal advice. Now, when it comes to legal advice, it's definitely tough because there's a lot of privacy, and there's just a lot of security concerns that a lot of people have shown. For example, something that you can do to utilize Chat AI as a legal advisor is whenever you're about to sign a contract, you can copy and paste this contract into ChatGPT and ask it, okay, what's the problem with this contract? Which clauses should I be more careful about? Which clauses should I renegotiate and stuff like that? But this is extremely helpful, right? I mean, typically you would pay a lawyer, like especially a lawyer in the US, at least like $200 an hour to help you figure this stuff out. And it's not going to take them an hour. It's going to take them many hours to be able to help you. But ChatGPT will do it for free, and it will do it in literally a few seconds. So that's good. However, there are concerns. Like, for example, a lot of the data that you actually put into ChatGPT is not private. They've said so themselves. They've said that if I'm not mistaken, they've said that any data that you actually input into ChatGPT may be used. We may look at it. We may be able to sell any information to third parties and stuff like that. I think this is something that I may have seen in their privacy statements. So there is that privacy concern, like whether you should be giving ChatGPT sensitive information or not. But despite those concerns, ChatGPT can definitely help you, navigate through the legal situations that you're in. At least something that it can definitely help you to do is narrow down the questions that you need to ask a lawyer when you get on an actual call with an actual lawyer, which is definitely highly recommended. So finally, ethical risks. Of course, when you're working with these types of models, you have to understand that there are ethical risks that you have to consider. One of them, for example, is bias and discrimination. Like these models are trained on a lot of publicly available data, and the world as we know it is very biased. There's just a lot of discrimination. So an AI model that's trained on this very biased data may actually suggest biased solutions or may give you biased information. So that's something that you always have to keep in mind. Misinformation and misrepresentation. You might actually get false or inaccurate information from this GPT models. Again, GPT does not know things, right? It does not distinguish between fact and fiction. It just generates text based on probability. So it doesn't really know things. And keeping that in mind helps you understand that, not all the information that you get might be accurate. And I've definitely seen a lot of mistakes or false information generated by ChatGPT and other similar models. Privacy and security, this is something that we mentioned earlier. Everything that you put into ChatGPT might cause a privacy and security risk. You might be giving it sensitive data, might itself be trained on sensitive data. If you're working with a client, for example, and the client gives you information and you put that information into ChatGPT, that might cause, and God forbid that information leaks out, that puts you at risk, right? Because you're technically supposed to be very careful about the information that you work with. So there is that privacy and security concern. Manipulation and deception. People might use ChatGPT to create fake content, generally fake reviews, articles. They might create fake, quotes, like making them sound like someone has saved them and stuff like that. And there definitely are, especially with deep fake now. I mean, initially you used to be able to create videos that look like someone, but now you can create text that sounds like someone too. And now there's voice AI, which allows you to sound like them. So you can basically create a lot of manipulative and deceptive content, publish it on the internet. Intellectual property. There's been a lot of fighting about this, especially with generative art, because a lot of artists feel like their art is being used to train AIs, and that AI is now freely available for anyone to just create art content, which is completely understandable. I mean, if I am an artist and you go ahead and you ask an AI, hey, draw something for me that in the style of Dawit Abraham, then it can actually do that for you. And that may cause a lot of intellectual property fights, which currently are ongoing. So you may want to be very careful about intellectual property. Something that I heard from Becky is there were a lot of these people who are creating blogs using ChatGPT, and then the content rating went very low. I'm sorry if I'm butchering this, but this is how I understood it. They were creating those content from ChatGPT, and they were ranking very low because it was just taking content that was already existing somewhere out there. And it might eventually cause intellectual property rights, but it always helps to understand that ChatGPT is not technically creating this content for you. It's just using what it has learned on to generate text for you. So it always helps to keep that in mind. And of course, unintended consequences. Even the ChatGPT website warns you of that, right? Like, don't just listen to what GPT tells you to do. There's a really good book, Life 3.0, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And there are so many use cases in there where AI might actually use these types of like chat interfaces to make people create software that breaks it out and just like helps it dominate the world, which is a very funny and interesting use case. But there could be unintended consequences to using these types of models. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's definitely worth considering. And might not be something as complicated as that. It might just be something that ends up harming your computer, for example. It might be something that ends up harming you, or whatever. So it's always good to keep in mind that there are these consequences. Of course, accountability and responsibility. Like, who's responsible for the stuff that you create using these types of AI models? Is it the company that created the AI model? Is it the AI itself? Is it you? There's a lot of debate on that. Right? Like, there's this ethical concern. to discuss. This has been around since the the advent of AI in anything really, like in self-driving cars, for example. Who goes to jail when someone gets hit by a self-driving car? Is it Tesla? Is it Elon Musk? Is it the person who bought the car? Is it the person who wrote the software for the AI? There's a lot of debate ongoing about this issues, which it's interesting. Finally, there's these recommendations. I think we should definitely go to the Q&A now.
Yes, so there are a couple of people that have shared their questions in the chat. The first is from Hayat. She asks, if we keep using ChatGPT, won't it limit the capability of human beings' creativity?
Well, that's a very interesting. I think we can talk about that for the next 1 hour, or like many hours. In my personal experience, what I have discovered is it amplifies my creativity. I've seen how I can use it to come up with ideas, or to get to solutions, or to get to types of the type of brainstorming and thinking that I want a lot faster. So there's that. But then again, I do understand how that could be a problem. Like if you always use ChatGPT to create content for you, then you will eventually just stop using your brain, which is something that I'm also afraid of. For example, whenever I'm writing emails, I am now concerned that, because I always try to like check them with these types of models. If I lose the internet and I'm asked to write an email like I used to do, I generally get scared. I'm like, oh damn, like I need to be able to come up with a good email myself. But then again, this is a really good question, and I guess it goes beyond this, right? Like, how do we want to be human in the future? Like, what does it mean to be creative? If an AI can always generate creative content much better than you can, then do you really need to create creative content, right? That's a very good psychological question to ask ourselves. But yeah, I really don't have a solid answer about that, but these are just my opinions.
Okay, then the next question is from Riri. I hope I'm reading that right. So the question is there a way that we can have ChatGPT moderated or checked in the African context? So for example, if I'm giving advice in a specific area or reviews for an area which are, largely subjective and not necessarily objective. So the background for this question is that ChatGPT on Bing largely uses data scraped from the internet, which may not always be correct. So is there a way that we can have ChatGPT moderated for the African context?
Interesting. So technically, you can actually take the GPT-3 model and you can actually train it with your own data. So GPT is an open source project. So you can basically use it to do whatever you want, and you can make it very specific on topics that you'd like it to be very a good expert on. And a lot of companies have actually done this. I believe, for example, the GitHub Copilot is a very specific version of GPT-3, which was trained on Stack Overflow and GitHub, and just it allows you to write better code. And you can do the same thing. The thing is, you need a lot of data. You need a lot of expert documents on the things that you want it to be an expert on. So if that content does not exist, then there's really nothing you can do. But if that content exists, then you can definitely train your own GPT model to be able to do that perfectly. I hope I did understand the question, and I hope I answered it. If I didn't, you can just also go ahead and comment or write it on the messages.
We have another question, and this one is ChatGPT model public on the internet or not?
So the ChatGPT model, I think it uses the GPT 3.5 model, which I don't think is open source. Is that what you meant? Public on the internet, the model itself. So the model itself, I think it might be, but no, I don't think it is. I'm not sure, so I'm not going to answer that. But I do know that OpenAI has a proprietary version of the GPT-3 model, which I think they're calling GPT 3.5, and Bing Chat is using GPT-4, but at least up until GPT-2 or maybe even GPT-3 is an open source model that you can actually use.
Okay, so that is all the questions we have. If anyone has any further questions, please feel free to write them in the next minute or so we can get it, so we can have David answer it for us. If not, oh, okay. Jonas has a question. What do you think about BART or Google's language model that uses real-time internet data to generate texts?
I haven't actually used Bard today. I actually want to, but I haven't used it. Bing, however, uses real-time internet to generate texts. And last time I used Bing, it was very weird. It was very emotional. I don't think they took their time in trying to, like, I know that the ChatGPT team took their time to correct the output, not very, not in a very good way. As I've read, they may have used some, Kenyan developers or Kenyan users to test the ChatGPT model and to kind of correct its output. And these people were very underpaid, and they had to deal with a very horrible ChatGPT responses. But that may have made ChatGPT much better in a sense. The Bing Chat, I don't think they did any filtering on it, and then it resulted in it being very, very dramatic. Sometimes it gaslights users, and I just generally, personally, did not enjoy the experience myself. I would love to see how Bard actually performs. And by the way, if you can mention your, like, say your opinions in the messages, that would also be great, because I'd love to read them. I'm just saying it's open, not just for questions, but opinions, because I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Okay, so we have two more questions, one from Carlo, one from Gamacho. So Gamacho asks, is there a way we can access ChatGPT from here? I know some of them, but they're not as good as the original one.
Interesting. So there's definitely a lot of people who've told me that they were able to find ways. There are some websites that allow you to buy phone numbers that are not Ethiopian and use them to verify. I'm not sure if that's a legal thing to do, so I'm not going to recommend that. But I'm sure if where you can definitely try to find ways to do it. What we know for a fact is it's actually not available in Ethiopia. The reason I had access to it is because I was in the States when it came out, and I was able to use my US phone number to verify. But this is very unfortunate. This is something that I've kind of tried to talk about, because this is kind of discrimination in its sense. It's exclusion to access to one of the most important discoveries of our lifetime. So I do believe there are ways you can access it, and if you do find a way to access it, go ahead and do that. Once you verify your phone number, as long as you're using a VPN, it definitely works for you. So, but yeah, there are like YouTube videos showing you how to actually get access to it. So you can just go ahead and try to Google that.
Okay, so our last question is from Carlo, who asks, which or what kind of jobs do you think ChatGPT will replace in the near future?
Interesting. So this is why I really suggest going ahead and reading this book on this recommendations list, like Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. It's Life 3.0, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. So technically, and it's in my opinion that all jobs will be replaced by AI, at least ones that do not require affection, right? Like, when I mean affection, what I mean is, for example, if you have someone caring for your health, you might prefer it to be a human telling you're going to be okay, it's going to be fine. And that emotional connection might be very valuable to you, which would make it, one of the professions to remain in the long future. And any other like socially important and emotionally important jobs might actually remain. Most recently, I guess, most immediately, jobs that require content creation, for example, like being able to, for example, copywriters, email copywriters, or ad copywriters may find it very difficult to find jobs, at least for the same price. Now that you can just generate these types of texts, um, other types of like very what do you call it? Very manual and repetitive tasks might definitely be taken over by AI. One of them is definitely going to be, I mean, I guess near term, these are the jobs that I think will be, but eventually, even coding, this blue collar tasks, like where you go ahead and you use information on the internet to be able to do something, those types of tasks like accounting, copywriting, coding, marketing, anything anything that just requires you to basically use information on the internet to be able to do it. I think those jobs will definitely go away. But then video, like creativity, like for example, at least until that is also taken away by AI, TikTokers or YouTube creators that are entertainers may find themselves secure, at least for a little while. But even in the future, where it when AI just replaces everything, at least jobs where you say, hey, I am a human and I'm doing this, you might be able to get sympathetic jobs, I would say, because humans are very sympathetic with ourselves, and we will probably always value human interaction, regardless of how efficient AIs can be. So that's my thought on the subject.
All right. Okay, so we have two more final questions from our audience. Before we get to that, everyone, please note that we will be sending out the recording of this webinar along with the slides for you. We've also sent out a survey email so that we can understand what you want and what your thoughts were on the entire webinar, so that we can have a better one for you in the future. So the two questions are from Masarat and one from Jonas. So Masarat asks, does ChatGPT store your conversations? For example, if you need to access it at any time, can you get it?
Yeah, you can actually, yeah, it puts a list of all the conversations you've had with it, so you can go back and refer to it or continue the conversation if you want.
Okay. And the last is Jonas asks, what do you recommend for a TensorFlow developer but a novice programmer in order to join the gaming industry? And how has AI shaped your industry?
Interesting. So there's a lot of new stuff that's actually happening in gaming and AI. I mean, you have this companies trying to create games with NPCs that are very responsive, like this non-player characters that are very responsive and that look and feel like real persons. Like one of that movie that came out recently, Free Guy, or no, I forgot the name of the title of the movie. But there's a lot of stuff going on in that direction. You can see a lot of AI being used to create more immersive gaming experiences, more immersive VR experiences, and there's just a lot of stuff that you can actually do in there. There's plenty of places to start. First, easiest place to start is just start building games. Start using one of those engines like Unity or Unreal, and try to actually create a few games. Now that it's actually much easier due to ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot, you can actually come up with great stuff. A lot of the AI generative art might be of use to kind of help you generate, maybe generate like 2D art if you're working on 2D games. That definitely makes it a lot easier, especially like if you actually go into Midjourney and ask it to create 2D game, like 2D images that you might be able to use as assets in your game. But again, it's really like not as flushed out as you would want it to be, because there's just a lot of work that goes into modifying this, 2D assets. And like I saw one of those 3D generative models that was way behind. Like there's just no way we could use that to create games as of now. So there's just a lot of, I guess, work that still needs to be done. But looking at how fast things have been moving, especially in the past few months, even, we can, you can estimate that there's going to be a lot of amazing tools out there that are going to generate amazing art assets for you that you can actually use in your games. But generally, for now, you can definitely at least generate some portions of the 2D assets that you might need for your game. And this is also how we've been able to use AI. Most of the work, I would say, at least for us, has been in trying to help us code faster instead of generate art faster. I mean, generative art is great, but again, there's a lot of stuff that misses. But when it comes to the actual code and the actual logic, there's definitely, it's been very, very helpful in our industry.
Great. Thank you, David, and thanks everyone for joining. Before I end the webinar, I just want to give you a recommendation that Jonas has recommended. So if you want to access ChatGPT, he says you can actually access it using your browser's incognito mode and using a free phone number for the text verifications. And he emphasizes to not forget to go incognito. So for those of you who want to access ChatGPT from Ethiopia, I guess you can go ahead and give that a try. I want to thank everyone for making it to the end of the webinar, and for David for organizing and giving us the walkthrough on ChatGPT. Like I said, make sure to have an eye out on your emails, as we'll be sending out the presentations and the recording. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.